Remove that polo jam lapel, or I will have the bailiff remove it for you. The voice boomed from the high bench, echoing off the mahogany paneling of the municipal courtroom. It was a voice used to commanding absolute obedience, thick with the boredom and irritation of a man who had already sat through 3 hours of traffic violations and penny disputes. Judge Harold Miller leaned over his desk, peering over the rim of his reading glasses at the woman standing before the defense table. Noelle Davidson did not move to touch the lapel of her blazer. She stood with her weight shifted slightly to her left leg, her right hand resting heavily on the handle of a sleek black cane. Her knuckles were white where she gripped it. She wore a royal blue blouse that brought out the brightness of her eyes, though currently those eyes were fixed on the judge with a calm, terrifying stillness. Her long blonde hair was pulled back in a practical low ponytail, but a few strands had escaped, framing a face that was pale and set like stone. On the lapel of her dark gray blazer sat a small, unassuming metal pin. It wasn't a flashy ribbon rack or a large medal swinging from a ribbon. It was a miniature lapel pin of a silver star with a small wreath indicating a subsequent award. To the uninitiated, it looked like costume jewelry or a patriotic trinket. To the initiated, it was a heavy burden to carry into a room full of strangers. "I am waiting, Miss Davidson," the judge said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. "This is a court of law. We maintain a certain level of decorum here. I do not permit political statements, costume jewelry, or stolen valor in my courtroom. You are here to contest a parking violation, not to play dress-up." Noelle took a slow breath. The air in the courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. She could feel the eyes of the gallery on her back, a dozen people waiting for their own cases, shifting in the uncomfortable wooden pews, whispering to one another. "Your Honor," Noelle said, her voice soft but carrying a rasp that hadn't been there 5 years ago. "This is not jewelry, and it certainly isn't a political statement." The judge scoffed, a sharp, dismissive sound that cracked like a gavel. "It is a military insignia," the judge said, waving a hand dismissively. "I know what the Silver Star looks like, young lady. My father served in Korea. I have seen real heroes, and quite frankly, wearing a decoration of that magnitude to try and garner sympathy for a parking ticket is not only in poor taste, it is disrespectful to the men who actually died earning them. Now take it off." Noella's fingers twitched on the cane. The nerve damage in her right arm flared, a phantom burning sensation that ran from her shoulder to her fingertips, but she forced her hand to remain still. She did not reach for the pin. "I cannot do that, sir," she said. The judge's face reddened. The bailiff, a heavy-set man named Officer Higgins, who had been leaning against the wall looking half asleep, straightened up and took a step toward the defense table. The tension in the room spiked. "You can't or you won't?" Judge Miller asked. "I won't," Noelle corrected him. This was the moment the script usually flipped. Usually, the defendant would crumble, apologize, and fumble with the clasp to appease the angry man in the black robe. But Noelle stood rooted to the spot. The pain in her leg was a dull, constant throb, a reminder of a mountain pass in the Kunar province, but it was also an anchor. It kept her present. The judge slammed his hand down on the desk. "You are treading on very thin ice. I have half a mind to hold you in contempt right now. You come into my courtroom disrupting proceedings with your refusal to follow basic instructions. I don't care if you bought that at a surplus store or if it belongs to your husband or your father. When you are in this room, you follow my rules. Wearing unearned awards is a crime in some contexts, but here it is simply an insult to my intelligence." Noelle's eyes narrowed slightly. The assumption hung in the air, heavy and suffocating.
Husband, father. The idea that the silver star with the oak leaf cluster could belong to the woman standing there, the woman in the royal blue top with the blonde ponytail and the limp, hadn't even crossed his mind as a remote possibility. "It doesn't belong to my husband," Noelle said, her voice steady, cutting through the murmurs rising from the gallery. "Then whose is it?" the judge demanded. "Your boyfriend's? Is he waiting out in the hall? Maybe we should bring him in here and ask him why he lets his girlfriend wear his commendations as fashion accessories." A few people in the back laughed. It was a nervous, sycophantic laughter, the kind people use to stay on the good side of a bully. Noel felt a sudden sharp spike of adrenaline. It wasn't the fear of the judge, it was the specific frequency of the mockery. It sounded like static for a split second. The wood-paneled walls of the courtroom dissolved. She wasn't in a municipal building in Ohio, she was back in the dirt, the air choking with the copper taste of blood and the acrid sting of cordite. The noise wasn't laughter, it was the screaming of a turbine engine failing, the chop of rotor blades struggling against thin mountain air. She looked down at her chest, expecting to see the royal blue blouse, but for a microsecond, she saw the torn fabric of a flight suit, dark and wet. She saw the silver glint in the instrument panel shattered across her lap. The weight on her chest wasn't a pin, it was the body of her co-pilot slumped forward, the harness locking him in place. The memory hit her with the force of a physical blow, rocking her back on her heels. She gripped the cane tighter, her knuckles turning ivory. The courtroom snapped back into focus. The judge was still talking, his mouth moving, but the sound seemed to be coming from underwater. "Disrespectful to the uniform," he was saying. "Officer Higgins, remove the item from the defendant's lapel and place it in evidence until these proceedings are concluded." Noel's head snapped up. The haze of the memory vanished, replaced by cold, hard clarity. The bailiff was moving toward her, his hand outstretched. He didn't look malicious, just tired and doing his job, but he was reaching for the one thing she had left that proved she hadn't died on that mountain. "Don't touch me," Noel said. It wasn't a shout, it was a command. It was the voice of a captain who had held a perimeter with a sidearm while waiting for a medevac that was 3 hours late. It was a voice that stopped Officer Higgins in his tracks 3 feet away from her. The judge blinked, stunned by the sudden shift in her demeanor. "Excuse me," I said. "Do not touch me," Noel repeated, turning her gaze from the bailiff back to the bench. "You can fine me, you can throw me in a cell for this parking ticket, but you will not touch this pen, and you will not force me to remove it." In the back of the courtroom, a young man in a collared shirt sat up straighter. He had been doom-scrolling on his phone, waiting for his name to be called for a noise complaint, but the tone of Noel's voice had cut through his distraction. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the way she held herself, the specific distribution of weight off the injured leg, the 1,000-yard stare that had momentarily glazed her eyes before snapping into focus. He squinted at the pin on her lapel, then he looked at her face again. He zoomed in on the phone in his hand, rapidly typing a name into a search engine. Noel Davidson, Army Aviation. His eyes widened. He looked from his phone to the woman, then back to the phone. He didn't hesitate. He slipped out of the pew, ducking low, and hurried toward the exit doors. The bailiff at the back gave him a stern look, but let him pass. Once in the hallway, the young man dialed a number with trembling fingers. "Come on, pick up, he muttered, pacing the marble floor. "Sergeant Major, it's Miller. Yeah, I'm at the downtown courthouse. You're not gonna believe this. You know that brief we got on the new Veteran Outreach Initiative, the one about the Davidson case? Yeah, she's here, and the judge is about to have her arrested for wearing her own stack. No, seriously, he thinks she's a spouse. He's trying to confiscate her silver star." The voice on the other end of the line was sharp and immediate. "Stay on the line. I'm walking into the general's office right now." Inside the courtroom, the standoff had curdled into something ugly. Judge Miller's face was a mottled purple. He had lost control of his room, and for a man like him, that was the ultimate sin. "You are in direct contempt of court, Miss Davidson," the judge hissed. "I am giving you 10 seconds to hand that pen to the bailiff, or you will be taken into custody immediately, and I will make sure you undergo a psychiatric evaluation because you are clearly delusional." Noel didn't flinch. She felt the old anger, the kind she had learned to bottle up during months of physical therapy, when doctors told her she'd never walk without a brace, when boards asked if she wasn't sure she just hadn't panicked in the cockpit. "I am not delusional, Your Honor," Noel said, her voice dropping to a register that carried to the back of the room without shouting. "And I am not a civilian playing dress-up. I earned this. I earned it when I pulled 3 men out of a burning bird in the Petch River Valley. I earned it when I took a 7.62 round through the leg and kept flying for 20 minutes to get us back to the fob." The judge laughed. It was a cruel, incredulous sound. You expect me to believe that a young woman in a designer blouse who looks like she should be heading a PTA meeting is a combat pilot? Please, I have seen the files on female engagement teams. I know what you all do. It's honorable service, sure, but let's not pretend you were kicking doors or flying sorties.
The ignorance was breathtaking. It was a physical weight in the room. Noelle felt a heavy stone settle in her stomach. It wasn't just him, it was the system. It was the years of, "Are you the spouse at the gate?" It was the, "Where is your husband at the VA hospital?" "You are making a mistake," Noelle said quietly. The judge leaned back, crossing his arms. "The only mistake here is yours. Officer Higgins, arrest her. Contempt of court, and add a charge of falsifying government records if that ID she showed the clerk earlier claims she's an officer." Higgins looked uncomfortable. He looked at Noelle, then at the judge. He was a retired deputy, and his gut was telling him something was wrong. But an order was an order. He reached for his handcuffs. "Ma'am, please," Higgins whispered, leaning in. "Just take it off. Don't make me do this." Noelle looked at him, her blue eyes filled with a sad resolve. "Do what you have to do, deputy, but I'm not taking it off." Higgins sighed and reached for her wrist, the one gripping the cane. The double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open, they flew open with a force that banged them against the stops. The sound was like a gunshot, freezing everyone in the room. "Hold it!" The voice was a baritone roar that made the judge's earlier shouting sound like a whisper. It was a voice honed on parade decks and in command centers, a voice that demanded instant spinal reflex attention. Every head in the gallery whipped around. Walking down the center aisle was a phalanx of uniforms. In the lead was a man with 3 stars on his shoulders, his service greens immaculate, his face a mask of controlled fury. Flanking him were 2 military police officers and a sergeant major who looked like he chewed concertina wire for breakfast. Lieutenant General Marcus Thorne did not look at the gallery. He did not look at the bailiff. His eyes were locked on the judge. Judge Miller stood up, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Excuse me? Who do you think you are, bursting into my—" General Thorne didn't stop until he was at the wooden gate separating the gallery from the well of the court. He pushed it open with a sharp clack and stepped through. The MPs stopped at the gate, standing at parade rest, their presence suddenly making the courtroom feel very small. General Thorne stopped 6 feet from Noelle. He ignored the judge entirely for a moment. He turned his body toward her, snapped his heels together, and executed a slow, crisp salute. It was a salute of absolute respect. It held for 3 long seconds. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Noelle shifted her weight. She released the cane with her right hand, letting it lean against her hip, balancing precariously on her bad leg to free her arm. She straightened her spine, fighting the tremors, and returned the salute. It wasn't perfect. The nerve damage made her hand tremble slightly, but it was correct. "As you were, Captain," Thorne said gently, dropping his hand. Noelle grabbed her cane again, exhaling a breath she felt like she'd been holding for an hour. "Thank you, General." Thorne turned to the bailiff. Higgins snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. He backed away, nodding furiously at the general. Then slowly, terrified, General Thorne turned his gaze up to the bench. Judge Miller had sunk back into his chair, looking suddenly very small in his large robe. "General Miller," stammered, trying to regain some composure. "I must protest this interruption. I'm in the middle of a proceeding." "You are in the middle of committing a grave error, Judge," Thorne said. His voice was conversational, which somehow made it more terrifying. "I received a call that a Distinguished Service Cross recipient was being threatened with arrest in your courtroom for wearing her award." The judge blinked. "Distinguished Service? No, no. You have been misinformed. This woman is wearing a Silver Star pin, which she clearly bought online. She claims to be a pilot. I was just about to have her removed for stolen valor." Thorne stared at him. The general reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. He unfolded it with deliberate, sharp movements. "Noelle Davidson," Thorne read aloud, not from the paper, but from memory, staring at the judge. Captain, United States Army, retired, 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The judge went pale. The 160th? The Night Stalkers? Thorne continued, his voice ringing out. On August 14th, during a blackened extraction under heavy fire in the Kunar province, then Lieutenant Davidson's aircraft was struck by RPG fire, severing the hydraulic systems and critically wounding her co-pilot. Despite sustaining a gunshot wound to the right leg and shrapnel wounds to the right arm, Lieutenant Davidson maintained control of the aircraft.
Thorne took a step closer to the bench. She flew that bird for 22 minutes with manual flight controls, fighting a catastrophic failure while her crew chief returned fire. She successfully landed the aircraft at a forward operating base, saving the lives of the 6 Rangers on board and her crew. She was the last one off the bird, and she dragged her co-pilot out of the wreckage before the fuel tanks blew. The general lowered the paper. The courtroom was dead silent. The young man in the back who had made the call was grinning, tears in his eyes. The rest of the gallery looked from the judge to the woman in the blue top with new eyes. They saw the cane not as a sign of weakness, but as a receipt for the cost of business. She was awarded the Silver Star for that action, Thorne said. And 18 months later, after fighting a medical board to return to flight status, she was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for a second action in Syria, where she knowingly flew a compromised aircraft into a kill box to extract a surrounded Special Forces team. That pin on her lapel, it represents the second highest award for valor this nation can bestow. Thorne paused, letting the weight of the words settle. She doesn't wear the full medal because she doesn't like the attention, Judge. She wears the pin to remind herself that she survived. And you wanted to arrest her for it. Judge Miller looked like he wanted to vanish. He looked at Noel. He saw the blonde hair, the blue blouse, the cane. He saw his own prejudices reflected back at him, ugly and undeniable. "I didn't know," Miller whispered. She didn't present military ID. "She shouldn't have to," Thorne snapped. "And she told you. You didn't listen. You saw a woman and you assumed she was an accessory. You assumed her valor was stolen because it didn't look like the version you saw in movies from 50 years ago." Noel stepped forward. The tapping of her cane was the only sound. "I don't want an apology for myself, Your Honor," Noel said. Her voice was tired now. The adrenaline was fading, leaving the pain in its wake. "But the next time a veteran stands in front of you, look at their eyes, not their gender. Look at what they're carrying, not what they're wearing." The judge nodded, a jerky, humbled motion. "I understand. The contempt charges obviously dropped. The parking ticket is dismissed." Noel didn't smile. Thorne smiled, the iron mask melting into genuine warmth. "You too, Noel. We were wondering when you'd stop by the post. The new pilots need to hear how you pulled off that auto-rotation in the dark." "I'm a little rusty," Noel said. Thorne chuckled. "I doubt that." He gestured to the door. "Shall we?" Noel turned and began the long walk up the aisle. This time she didn't feel the eyes of the gallery as judgment. She felt them as a silent salute. People pulled their legs in to give her room. The young man who had made the call stood up as she passed, giving her a nod. She returned it. As she reached the doors, the sunlight from the hallway spilled in, blindingly bright compared to the dim courtroom. "Wait," the judge called out. Noel stopped and turned back. Miller was standing. He looked stripped of his arrogance. "Thank you for your service, Captain Davidson, and I am sorry." Noel looked at him for a long moment. It was the apology she had heard 100 times in different forms, from gate guards, from clerks, from other officers who realized too late. It didn't fix the leg. It didn't bring back the co-pilot, but it was a start. "Be fair, Judge," she said. "Just be fair." She pushed through the doors, the general at her side, leaving the silence of the courtroom behind her. Outside, the air was crisp. The general walked her to the bottom of the steps. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Noelle took a deep breath, adjusting her grip on the cane. The ghost of the memory, the rotor wash, the blood had receded. "I am now," she said. "That judge is going to have a rough afternoon," Thorne mused. "I already filed a formal complaint with the Judicial Oversight Board before I walked in the door." Noelle laughed, a genuine sound this time. "You always did believe in overwhelming firepower." "Standard operating procedure," Thorne said. "Ride with us. We can drop you at your car." Noelle looked at the military SUV idling at the curb. Then she looked down the street where her sedan was parked. "I think I'll walk," she said. "The leg needs to move." Thorne nodded. He understood. It wasn't about the walk. It was about moving under her own power. "Copy that, Captain. We'll be in touch."
Noelle watched them drive away. She touched the pin on her lapel. Cold, hard metal against the soft silk of the royal blue blouse. She thought about taking it off, putting it in her pocket to avoid the stares. She let her hand drop. She adjusted her blazer, gripped her cane, and walked down the street, the sun glinting off the silver star, shining bright for anyone who cared enough to look. The incident in the courtroom didn't stay in the courtroom. The young man's phone call had set off a chain reaction, but the presence of the general had turned it into a wildfire. By the time Noelle reached her car, her phone was buzzing. It was Sarah, her old crew chief, now a civilian contractor in Alabama. "Tell me you didn't almost get arrested by a traffic court judge." Sarah's voice crackled through the speaker. Noelle sighed, putting the car in gear. "News travels fast. The E4 Mafia network is faster than fiber optics, ma'am. The guy who called the base, his cousin, is in my shop. The story is already on the forums." Noelle groaned. "I just wanted to contest a $40 ticket, Sarah. The meter was broken. And you ended up getting a 3-star general to invade a municipal building? That is the most you thing I have ever heard." Sarah paused, her voice softening. "You okay, though? Really?" Noelle looked down at her leg. The throbbing was a dull roar now. "Yeah. He thought I was a spouse. He thought I bought the pin online." "Idiots are everywhere," Sarah said fiercely. "But you know what? Today, one less idiot is going to make that mistake. You held the line, Noelle, same as always." Noelle drove home in silence, the events of the morning replaying in her mind. The flash of the memory in the courtroom had been intense, stronger than it had been in months. It was the specific trigger, the questioning of her reality, the gaslighting. When you survive something impossible and someone tells you it didn't happen or that you aren't who you say you are, it destabilizes the foundation you've built your survival on. She pulled into her driveway and sat for a moment. Her house was quiet. A ramp led to the front door, a modification she had installed 2 years ago. She grabbed her cane and climbed out. Inside, she went to her study. On the wall was a shadow box. It held the full-sized medals, the patches from the 160th, the coin from the Secretary of Defense, and in the center, a photo of her bird, Dark Horse 26, sitting on a runway in Bagram, looking ugly and beautiful and lethal. She unpinned the miniature device from her blazer and placed it on the desk. She stared at it. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a contract. It was a promise she had made to the guys in the back of the bird that she would get them home. It was a promise she had made to herself that the injury wouldn't define her end, only her change. The judge had tried to break that contract. He had tried to rewrite her history to fit his limited worldview. And for a moment, the world had felt very fragile. But then the general had walked in. Noelle smiled. It wasn't the general saving her that mattered. It was the validation. It was the institutional memory stepping in to say, "We know what you did. We remember." She picked up the pin and put it in a small velvet box in the drawer. She wouldn't wear it tomorrow. She didn't need to wear it every day. She knew who she was, and now Judge Harold Miller knew too. 2 weeks later, Noelle received a letter in the mail.
The return address was the municipal court. She opened it wearily, expecting a rescheduled hearing or some bureaucratic nonsense. Instead, it was a handwritten note on stationery. Dear Captain Davidson, I have spent the last 2 weeks doing a lot of reading. I read the citation General Thorne left with the clerk. I read about the Night Stalkers. I read about the women who have served in combat aviation for decades. I prided myself on running a courtroom based on facts. I realized that my own biases were preventing me from seeing the facts standing right in front of me. I humiliated you, and I humiliated myself. I cannot undo that morning, but I have implemented a new training protocol for my staff regarding veteran interactions, and I have personally apologized to the General for my conduct. I wanted to apologize to you again in writing without the audience. You are a credit to your uniform and to this community. Enclosed is the payment for your parking ticket. I paid it personally. It was the least I could do. Sincerely, Judge Harold Miller. Noelle folded the letter. She didn't feel triumph. She felt relief. It wasn't about winning. It was about changing the terrain 1 inch at a time. She looked out the window. It was a nice day. She decided to go for a walk. She put on her royal blue jacket, grabbed her cane, and headed out the door. She didn't put the pin on. She didn't need to. She walked with the rhythm of her limp. Step, tap, step, tap. A cadence of survival that rang out louder than any gavel. If you enjoyed this story of justice and resilience, please like, share, and subscribe to She Chose Valor. Help us share more stories of the incredible women who have served and sacrificed for our country.